everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is September the 19th, 2024. I'm Barry Stagner. Glad you joined us this evening. And I will be traveling again this weekend up to the state of Washington, Longview, Calvary Chapel. I think it's in the city of Kelso. And I'll be speaking at the Living Ready Men's Conference on Saturday from 9 to 4 p.m., 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then I'll be speaking at both Sunday morning services at Calvary Chapel, Longview, at their 9 and 11 services. So if you're in the area, I believe that the registration is closed for the Saturday conference, but of course you can join us, any couples obviously, can join us on Sunday for both services. And they've actually asked me to do kind of a prophecy update, and we'll be talking about where we are in the grand scheme of things, how this week's events plays into the prophetic narrative and things of that nature. So I encourage you, come on out and join us if you live anywhere near Longview, Washington. And it was great to meet so many of you last weekend in Franklin, Tennessee. We had a wonderful weekend there. Thanks to Pastor Brian and the worship team and all those who served, who made it such an awesome day, and the church on Sunday as well. And next weekend, I will be in Brookville, Ohio, and speaking at a prophecy conference there with several others. And then on Sunday, I'll be at Calvary Chapel Faith Fellowship, which is in, I think, Liberty Township, also in Ohio. And I think it's about a half hour, 40 minutes from the venue in Brookville. And look forward to seeing a wonderful weekend after this one in Ohio. So if you're in the area, if you live anywhere near Liberty Township, come on by and join us for church on Sunday morning. Not sure what time the services are, but you can look it up. Just look up the church on the, just do what everybody does. Just Google it. Find out what time the church services are there at Calvary Chapel Faith Fellowship in Liberty Township, Ohio. With that said, let's jump into what's happening this week. And obviously, it's been a pretty major week as far as events in the Middle East. And, let me just preface our opening stories by saying this. Much like other things that happen in the days in which we live, there are things that aren't necessarily directly prophetic. And what happened with these pagers and cell devices isn't something that the scripture mentions specifically. But I think if we're going to look at this for potential prophetic involvement in advancing the narrative, I would think that we have to remember that Ezekiel talks about a hook in the jaw, something that's going to be a catalyst to broaden the current events that are going on both in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon and Syria, and the involvement of the Iranians and all the bloviating we've heard of late of those, not just finger wagging, but also making threats of retaliation and all these kind of things. And something is going to happen that's going to light the fuse that is the powder keg of the Middle East. And this has strong potential for doing that and igniting the Ezekiel war and the destruction of Damascus and other things we've kind of been keeping an eye on and an ear open for. Well, the first story comes from the Jewish News Syndicate. And it says, or the headline reads rather, Israel is accused of violating international law for, quote, incredibly precise, end quote, pager attack on Hezbollah. The Jewish state has not claimed responsibility for an incident in which some 2,700 pagers belonging to Hezbollah terrorists exploded in Lebanon and Syria earlier this week. But critics of Israel accused it of violating international law and of being responsible for the attack. Israel's pager attack in Lebanon detonated thousands of handheld devices across a slew of public spaces, seriously injuring and killing innocent civilians, according to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, as she's known here, a member of the so-called Squad and frequent critic of Israel. And, I just have to pause for a moment. We got an election coming up, and let's stop voting for stupid people, because this is one of the most ridiculous accusations that's come out of the mouth of this woman, who's had many ridiculous things that she said during her tenure. If you live in her district, stop voting for her. I don't know, if there's any other candidates, but it seems like any candidate would be a better option and somebody just so out of touch with reality. And this attack clearly and unequivocally violates international humanitarian law and undermines U.S. efforts to prevent a wider conflict, Ocasio-Cortez stated. Congress needs a full accounting of the attack, including an answer from the State Department as to whether any U.S. assistance went into the development or deployment of this technology. And the Council on American Islamic Relations, which was among the organizations that blamed Israel for being attacked on October 7th, called for the Biden administration to condemn the Israeli government for killing children and maiming numerous civilians in Lebanon by detonating bombs reportedly placed in pagers without any regard for innocent life. The Israeli government reportedly detonated explosive contained in pagers in Lebanon. 2 children and a medical worker are reportedly among the victims of the attack, CARE said. The attack could lead to a spread and escalation of the conflict, analysts said. Now, if added that the attack was an Israeli brazen and wanton act of terrorism that has killed at least 2 children and maimed countless people who had nothing to do with the cross-border war, if the attack targeted 2,700 people with ties to Hezbollah, a U.S. designated terror organization, and struck 3 additional civilians, that would mean that the operation had about a 99.89% effective rate of targeting terrorists compared to civilians. If Israel was responsible, then on available information, these seem to be incredibly precise. Rules on targeting are principally necessity, distinction, and proportionality, according to Natasha Hansdorf, a barrister in the UK and legal director for the UK Lawyers for Israel, and they reported this to the Jewish News Syndicate. It's hard to imagine a better means of targeting Hezbollah operatives, whoever is behind the exploding devices, Hansdorf said. I would ask these individuals exactly which international law did they claim was violated. And again, these pagers were distributed to Hezbollah members, not just the rank and file of Hezbollah, or the foot soldiers, so to speak, but those who had some level of authority within Hezbollah. So, again, targeting Hezbollah, injuring Hezbollah, I believe the statistics are, because some were picked up the pager to see what the number was when it detonated. There were 500 people or so who were blinded by this event. And one of the things I think that we need to recognize in this just incredibly unique effort to combat an enemy is exactly what this lawyer said. It was specific. It was minimal. And, who knows what the situations were with the harming of children or hospital workers. And, hospital worker could have been a member of Hezbollah. Let's not rule that out. And somebody could have been holding a child when the pager was detonated. And I think most of us saw online the video of a man in a grocery store when his pager detonated. And it wasn't, didn't hurt anybody standing next to the guy. And there were a handful of people in this market standing right next to the guy. And it only hurt him. And it hurt him. And he went down and was writhing and screaming in pain. But, again, these are the adversaries of the nation of Israel who want to see their destruction, who are part of the group that the U.S. has labeled as a terror organization that have been launching hundreds and hundreds and thousands of rockets into Israel since October 7th because of Israel's response to what Hamas did on October 7th. And, it's funny that Ocasio-Cortez, seems to forget that Israel is a sovereign nation and owes no one an explanation. The U.S. is not in charge of Israel. And the only reason Israel, I think, even considers some of the things that the U.S. demands is because of the resources that they receive from us to battle these types of things. So, I think, Ocasio-Cortez demanding accountability, it just, again, shows how out of touch she is with reality. Did I mention please stop voting for her? Let me make sure I get that through. We have to quit voting for these people who are just so bizarre and hate our country. It just doesn't make any sense to keep these people keep putting these people in places of power. Unless, of course, someone hates our country too. And sadly, that's a lot of what is the cause for putting such ridiculous, unqualified people in places of power. Now, the Times of Israel says Israel didn't tamper with Hezbollah's exploding pagers. It made them, according to the New York Times. Israeli spies are behind Hungarian firm BAC Consulting that supplied the devices, the New York Times reports, and other shell companies mask ownership. Bulgaria, probing another firm linked to the ongoing saga, said in a report Thursday that this firm apparently supplied pagers used by Hezbollah and was secretly set up by Israeli spies as part of a wide-scale operation that appeared to culminate this week when the devices exploded, killing several and maiming thousands of Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon and Syria. And the New York Times claimed that rather than merely managing to tamper with the devices at some stage of their production or distribution, Israel actually manufactured them as part of an elaborate ruse. The report was the latest to seemingly pull the covers back on what is widely believed to have been a secret Israeli operation that burst into the open Thursday as thousands of devices blew up in Hezbollah strongholds. Then on Wednesday, hundreds of walkie talkies used by the group exploded as well, sowing fresh fears across Lebanon and underlying how much remains unknown about the apparent plot. Underlining, rather. Citing three unnamed intelligence officers with knowledge of the operation, the New York Times reported that BAC Consulting was part of a front set up by figures in Israeli intelligence. Two other shell companies were also created to help mask the link between BAC and the Israelis, according to the report. Now, again, considering the fact that, as we saw, there were some 2,700 pagers, the number pretty consistently has been 4,000 people were wounded in this attack between the pagers and, the sat phones or cell phones, whatever it was that happened the day after the initial attack. You've got 4,000 people who are in hospitals, and there was a group airlifted to Iran to receive medical care in Iran. Remember, Hezbollah is a proxy who's actually fighting on behalf of Iran and well financed by them. And so, the likelihood of a full-scale attack by Hezbollah seems to be pretty unlikely right now, simply because most of the folks with any type of authority have been wounded, and they couldn't take any more wounded people if there were a full-scale war to erupt into their hospitals because they're all full. So again, let's not, we're not cold-blooded or unconcerned with the loss of human life. But, I think one thing that gets lost in all this is Israel didn't start this. And, why are the Lebanese people, or I should say Hezbollah, the Lebanese people are kind of like the Iranian people. They're separate from the terror organization that seems to have such influence in their country. But, why are these people concerned with what's going on within the national boundaries of Israel and the Gaza Strip? And remember, the Gaza Strip is part of Israel. It's not a Palestinian state. It's not Palestine. It's Israel, even though they call it Palestine. And there's some interesting efforts going on since these recent events that we'll talk about here in a few moments. But, again, just, Israel being center stage is what's just so amazing prophetically, as Zechariah talks about Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone to all nations. And we're going to mention another portion of that verse here in a minute when we talk about the United Nothing and their recent vote. But, again, what an incredible military move, an amazing tactical move to do this in this limited manner. Again, if they would have somehow packed it with C4 and, to a degree where it would have been a massive explosion inside a pager, which obviously would have been impossible because of size. But if they could have created some type of a major explosive device that packs a huge punch inside of a pager, then, there would have been innocent lives lost. But, for the most part, I think the last number I read was 12 people were killed. But thousands were actually injured enough to go to the hospital, some of them critically, and 500 people were blinded. And again, so they're off the table as far as engaging in a war with Israel. And this is the ugliness of humanity being manifested. And it's got nothing to do with Israeli apartheid or any of the other things that they're so often accused of. It's a fight for survival. And as Netanyahu and others have said down through the years, if is if Hamas disarmed, there would be peace. If Israel disarmed, there'd be no Israel. And that is a fact. And that's what this whole from the river to the sea chant is actually intended to bring about, the destruction of the nation of Israel. And yet we know the Bible has said in both Amos and Zechariah, it's not going to happen. God's going to fight for these people and his chosen people. And ultimately, at the end of the tribulation, when Jesus returns, a third of the Jews who survived the tribulation are going to look upon the one whom they pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. And this speaks of what Paul talked about in Romans 11, that all Israel is going to be saved at the end of the tribulation, according to Zechariah 12:10. Well, again, how interesting that, I thought this headline really grabbed my attention. It probably did yours too. That, one of the stories was that Israel tampered with these pagers after they've been manufactured. Somehow got their hands on them. But I think the headline is probably more accurate. They didn't tamper with them. They made them and did all these covers, in order to make sure that Hezbollah didn't know who they were actually buying them from. That reminds me of a story. I talked to Amir. I was reading one of the fiction books that he and Steve Yonan wrote. That are great books. I encourage you, if you haven't bought or read any of them, read them, because it's full of facts and stories that actually happened, even with the fictional characters that are behind it. Some of the events, or most of them, are actual historically documented events that have happened over the years and even in recent history. I think this new book called The Sick Man includes October 7th. It's not recently written. So, but one of the stories in there was that Israel had contracted with the company that was supplying all the prefab concrete pieces for Iran's nuclear development center, or their what am I trying to say? Where they generate nuclear power. I'm sorry, nuclear plant. And Israel had gone in with this company that the Iranians had contracted with to, provide all these prefabbed concrete pieces, and they loaded them up with explosives. And obviously, that wasn't detectable. And when the Iranians had just about finished the facility, Israel blew it up. And just a click of a button, much like we've seen with these recent events. And so I called him here. I said, "Hey, is that real? I mean, did that really happen?" He said, "Absolutely. That absolutely happened. There's no question about it. It's a real event that took place." And it's just amazing, the ingenuity and the wisdom that God has given the Israeli people in their not just technological innovations, but medical advances. And, per capita, there's no nation that comes even remotely close to having the same number of Nobel Prize winners as Israel. Well, the World Israel News says, invasion soon, ? IDF moves thousands of troops to the northern border. Amid sky-high tensions between Israel and the Hezbollah terror group, the Israeli army announced on Wednesday that it was deploying tens of thousands of troops to the northern border. And the move comes one day after an alleged Mossad and IDF intelligence operation, which saw the simultaneous detonation of thousands of beepers belonging to Hezbollah members in Lebanon and Syria, killing at least 9, again, that number is 12, wounding some 3,000. The IDF said that it was transferring the elite 98th Division, numbering some 10 to 20,000 troops, to the border with Lebanon. The units within the 98th Division include paratroopers, artillery units, and commandos. Previously, the 98th Division was stationed in Khan Yunis in central Gaza, but withdrew from the area in August. And the 98th Division will join the 36th Division and numerous reserve units, which have been stationed along the northern border for months. In recent days, Israeli officials have signaled that the IDF is gearing up for an intensive military offensive against Hezbollah. Now, that makes more sense than just protective, going into defensive mode, expecting an invasion from Hezbollah. Hezbollah is going to have a hard time invading anybody, at least from a boots-on-the-ground perspective. And though we have seen a lot of rocket fires and drones invading Israeli airspace since all this happened, and if you got that Red Alert app, I'm sure most of you have seen that thing go off continuously in spurts since these events developed. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant both hinted to the Biden administration's envoy to the Middle East, Amos Hochstein, that time had run out for a diplomatic solution to end the fighting with Hezbollah. And for more than 11 months, Hezbollah has bombarded communities and military assets in northern Israel with near daily barrages of missiles, rockets, and explosive drones. And at least 60,000 Israelis were displaced from their homes due to the ongoing aerial assaults. Tens of thousands more who were not evacuated from their homes live under the constant threat of Hezbollah aggression. And on Monday, the Security Cabinet officially declared the return of the displaced northern to their home as a goal for the ongoing war. And again, this is something that people like Ocasio-Cortez and the rest of the squad don't take into account. And Rashida Tlaib, obviously being Palestinian, she couldn't care less about what is going on with the Israeli people. But, they're living in, just a constant barrage. I mean, there's been times where the Red Alert app was going off so frequently, you had to mute it and on your phone. I'm sure some of you have experienced that as well. In the middle of the night, a thing just keeps lighting up the room and lighting up the room if your phone's on a nightstand or near the bed. And, that's one thing. That's an inconvenience. But imagine every one of those rockets signifies an air raid siren. That indicates you have less than a minute to get to cover. And in some cases, only seconds, depending on your proximity to the border and the launch site. So again, 60,000 people displaced, the rest of them in the northern areas, living in, just this pins and needles condition. That's hard on your heart, your mind, your emotions, and certainly hard on children. And by the way, there's a, I don't want to know if I call it a ministry, but there's a gentleman named David Rubin who's actually a Jew from New York who's lived in Israel now for many, many years, 25 years or more, if I'm not mistaken. And he's got a ministry called the Israel Children's Fund, I think is the name. And one of the interesting things, we've actually visited there, and it is for the children of terrorist attacks, for those who lost a family member, and it's caused trauma, emotional, mental trauma. And boy, some of the things we saw with these kids, and there's thousands of them. And I know last time I was there, they have some 2,500 person waiting list to get into a school, and they were building a high school at the time when I was there a few years ago. And I'm trying to think, I'm missing a name there. But it's the Israeli Children's Fund, and be a worthy cause to go and look it up and support. It'll come to me as we continue the city that it's in. It's where the tabernacle stood for some 400 years, and it'll pop in my mind. I'm sorry, I have had so many messages to prepare and so many things to do, and another thing I'm sure we'll be talking about in coming days is any of you who've signed up for the Bible Bites that come online, come via email. Mir and I are making that into a book, and that's going to be released in December 1st, 2025. So it'll be a daily 365 daily devotions based on the Bible Bites that we've written together over these. We actually were kind of laughing. We started not long after Amir and I first met. And they go back all the way to 2018. So we've been at it for a while. And so I think you'll find that encouraging. Shiloh. Sorry, the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund. And Shiloh, Israel, obviously a city where I mentioned a minute ago, the tabernacle. And there's a whole movie set up. It's a great place to go. But David Rubin and the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund be a great thing for you to look up and consider supporting. And I was talking to David not too long ago, and the numbers just are astronomical. Obviously, when you've got 1,200 people who lost their lives, around 250 were kidnapped on October 7th, the need is even greater than it was, and increased exponentially in a single day in October of last year. Now, the Times of Israel reports that Israel offers to end the war and let Sinwar leave if all the hostages are freed at once and Gaza disarmed. Israel has put a proposal on the table that would end fighting in the Gaza Strip and give the head of Hamas safe passage out of the enclave in exchange for the immediate release of all hostages held in Gaza, the demilitarization of the Strip, and the establishment of an alternative governing power there, Khan News reported on Thursday. An Israeli official confirmed to the Times of Israel that the outlines of the report and said that Gail Hirsch, the government point man on the hostages, had presented the plan to American officials who were expected to pass it on to unspecified Arab officials. Hirsch told families of the hostages that the proposal was presented last week in a meeting with U.S. officials from the White House and the State Department. But Hamas Politburo member Ghazi Hamad swiftly rejected the offer, telling Al-Arabi Al-Jahid that the proposal for Sinwar's exit is ridiculous and indicates the negotiating bankruptcy of the occupation. It confirms the occupation's denial of what happened throughout the 8 months of negotiations. Negotiations are stuck due to the intransience of the Israeli position, Hamad said. And throughout the war and ceasefire negotiations, Hamas has appeared determined to try and maintain control of the Strip under any agreement. The framework proposal would appear to mark a backtrack from Prime Minister Netanyahu's vows to continue fighting until Hamas is destroyed and terror group head Yahya Sinwar is dead, but would still adhere to the official goals of the war by seeing to the effective dismantling of Hamas and a return of the captives. Now, again, some of this is politicking because Netanyahu knows full well that Hamas is not going to accept any type of deal. They have no interest in that. The only thing they have any interest in is the destruction of the nation of Israel and the death of all Jews. And there's nothing more that they desire. So they're not going to agree to anything. They never have. And that's why the adage floats around in Israel that Hamas never misses, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So again, he's not backtracking on anything. He knew full well that they were going to reject this, and they did, even before it became anything in the form of an official offer. Now, here's something that I want to mention that we started talking about a few moments ago, and that is what Zechariah prophesied in chapter 12, verse 3, about Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone to all nations, and stating at the end of the verse that all the nations of the earth are going to be gathered against it. And yet, here's what the Lord said, that I will cut into pieces all who would heave it away, and all who would, seek the destruction of Jerusalem, and obviously the Jews. The Lord is going to cut them into pieces. And the Jewish News Syndicate reports that the UN General Assembly passed a resolution calling for Jerusalem, or the old city, to be Jew-free. No Jews in East Jerusalem. Jerusalem's old city, in addition to Judea and Samaria, must do Judenrein within a year, according to the Palestinian drafted resolution, a place that has a group that has a seat at a table with no country. Remember, the UN accepted them as a country and had them at the this year's UN Security Council annual UN Security Council meeting. The UN General Assembly passed this Palestinian drafted resolution on Wednesday, passing by a margin of 124 to 14 with 43 abstentions. And it's meant to give force to a July advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice, which declared Israeli presence to be illegal in any area over the 1949 armistice line. Now, again, if these guys would read a history book, maybe learn a little bit about warfare, maybe they'd understand Israel's position a little bit better. And, Israel was constantly attacked. The day that they declared statehood, 5 nations attacked them. 1967, they were attacked again by some of those same nations. 73, attacked again by those same nations. And since when you win a battle, do you have to give back what you actually, for them, they recovered? All of Jerusalem is Israel's. The Lord said, I will put my name there perpetually and hear prayers made in that place. Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel, and all of it is the eternal capital of Israel. And yet this united nothing, these goofballs that waste millions and millions of American dollars by their presence here on U.S. soil, and the U.S. continuing to just feed money to this group of clueless imbeciles. And I'm sorry, I'm a little fired up today, but it's just so aggravating to see, these things coming off of U.S. soil, even though they represent an international community. And by the way, this group will have nothing to do with the global empire that is coming. They're not going to rule anything. The Antichrist, he's going to take charge of the world. He's going to have 9 associates. There'll be 10. He'll be among them or rise up from among them, according to Revelation 17. And it says, interestingly, that these guys have no kingdom as of yet, which says and means they aren't political leaders at this time. He's going to rise up as Antiochus Epiphanes did in the second century from obscurity. He's not going to have a royal bloodline. He's not going to be someone who deserves to rise up to that position. He's going to rise from obscurity. He's going to come out of nowhere like Antiochus did. And he's going to do some of the things that Antiochus Epiphanes did in the second century BC. He's going to violate, the most holy place like Antiochus Epiphanes did, slaughtered a pig on the altar, put a statue of Jupiter in the most holy place, and all these other things. And the Antichrist, he's not going to have a statue in there. He's going to go in there and declare himself to be God. And yet here you've got this group that, is saying, well, the only way we can move forward is if there are no Jews in the capital city of Israel. The biblical capital, that is. And again, just this group and their seeming self-exalted position and thinking, I don't want to say anything beyond what the scripture says, but the Lord said, you try and heave the city away and I'll cut you into pieces. So, keep your eye open. I do want to say this. So I think most of that stuff that's going to happen that, we're told about in Ezekiel as well as Zechariah and other places in scripture, we're not going to be here for any of that. So keep that in mind. But we are seeing just radical precursors to what's going to be fulfilled during the tribulation period. And that tells us it's coming soon. And we'll be gone before even 1 second ticks off the clock of the 70th week of Daniel. We have to be taken out of the way for the lawless one to be revealed. Now, the postmillennial says Kamala Harris was entirely supportive of Biden's decision to withhold weapons from Israel. During an interview on Tuesday, Vice President Kamala Harris stated she is entirely supportive of President Joe Biden's decision earlier this year to withhold weapons sales from Israel. Speaking at an event hosted by the National Association of Black Journalists, one of the things that we have done that I am entirely supportive of is the pause that we put on the 2,000-pound bombs. So there is some leverage that we have and that we have had and used. But ultimately, the thing that is going to unlock everything else in the region is getting this ceasefire deal done. Harris gave the response when pressed about how her policy would differ from her current boss in ways that might satisfy her critics who support Palestinians in the Israel-Hamas war. In May, Biden pledged to withhold certain weapon shipments to Israel if the U.S. ally launched a ground offensive into the last Hamas stronghold in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Some of those weapons have since been released. In August, before a campaign event in Michigan, Harris met with the founders of the Uncommitted National Movement, which activated tens of thousands of voters in the Wolverine state to withhold their votes from President Joe Biden in the primary because the administration supported Israel's war against Palestinian terrorists. Minnesota and Washington had similar initiatives. At that time, Abbas Alawi and Leila Elabed told the New York Times that they were in the welcoming line for Harris and told her that they wanted to support her, but that the anti-Israel voters they represented wanted her to consider an arms embargo on the Jewish state. Harris met with the group, and following the meeting, the leaders of the group claimed that Harris was open to the arms embargo and had the leaders follow up with her staff. However, following the massive backlash in light of Harris' spotty record on support for Israel, a source close to Harris disputed the claim and said the vice president wasn't open to the idea. And it's interesting because the Antichrist, and we're seeing this being normalized today, We're told in Daniel 11 that he will deceive the world by intrigue. And that Hebrew word translated as intrigue into English actually means slippery speech, or he's a smooth talker. And, he's a double talker too. He'll say one thing, he'll say what's necessary to the group he's speaking to, much like Kamala Harris just did, and mean or do something entirely different. But people are going to fall for him, and they're going to follow after him. As a matter of fact, they're going to go another step. They're going to worship him. And this is what Revelation 13 says about the Antichrist, whom the devil gives his power to. And we're told that the people will worship the dragon and the beast. And remember, the word worship means to prostrate and submit. So they'll bow down to this guy and submit to his plans because he is a smooth-talking flatterer. Reuters says, or he will be, I should say. Reuters says Russia warns the United States of the risk of World War III. And Russia said the West was playing with fire by considering allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russia with Western missiles and cautioned the U.S. on Tuesday that World War III would not be confined to Europe. Ukraine attacked Russia's western Kursk region on August 6th and has carved out a slice of territory in the biggest foreign attack on Russia since World War II. President Vladimir Putin said there would be a worthy response from Russia to the attack. And Sergei Lavrov, who served as Putin's foreign minister for more than 20 years, said that the West was seeking to escalate the Ukraine war and was asking for trouble by considering Ukrainian requests to loosen curbs on using foreign-supplied weapons. Since invading Ukraine in 2022, Putin has repeatedly warned of the risk of a much broader war involving the world's biggest nuclear powers, though he has said Russia does not want a conflict with the U.S.-led NATO alliance. We are now confirming once again that playing with fire, and they are like small children playing with matches, is a very dangerous thing for grown-up uncles and aunts who are entrusted with nuclear weapons in one or another Western country, Lavrov told reporters in Moscow. Americans unequivocally associate conversations about the Third World War as something that, God forbid, if it happens, will affect Europe exclusively, Lavrov said. And Lavrov added that Russia was clarifying its nuclear doctrine. In other words, a direct threat to the United States, that it would not be limited to European soil, but would spread all the way over to the United States. And certainly wars and rumors of wars would be a good heading over that particular story. Now, the Post-Millennial says that the White House claims it's incredibly dangerous to call out the Biden and Harris administration for saying Trump is a threat. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre lashed out at Fox News' Peter Doocy after he questioned her if the rhetoric she uses to characterize former President Trump could have sparked assassination attempts. This included repeated remarks describing Trump as a threat, which the press secretary doubled down on during Tuesday's press brief. Jean-Pierre was not receptive to the question and redirected the query to Doocy, claiming that his question was dangerous rather than her repeated remarks. It's been 2 days since someone allegedly tried to kill Donald Trump again, and you're here at the podium in the White House briefing room calling him a threat. How many more assassination attempts on Donald Trump until the president, the vice president, and you pick a different word to describe Trump other than threat? Doocy asked Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre fired back and said, I completely disagree with the premise of your question. The question that you're asking, it is also incredibly dangerous in the way that you're asking it because the American people are watching, she continued. And to say that from an administration who has consistently condemned political violence from an administration where the president called the former president and was grateful that he was okay, for you to make that kind of comment in your question, that is also incredibly dangerous. And the White House press secretary ultimately failed to provide a direct answer to Doocy's question. And there's the old double talk again, the political forked tongue, so to speak. And Jean-Pierre said during the press conference that it is important to bring down the temperature, but added in a follow-up that President Biden has been clear-eyed about the threat that the former president represents to our democracy. Yeah, a group that is basically destroying our country and is an actual threat to our democracy is pointing the finger at somebody else who wanted to make America and its democratic process, even though by definition we are a constitutional republic, a democratic constitutional republic. Um, and he wants to see America be what it used to be what the founding fathers intended it to be. But he's the threat. And yet here we've got an administration that has put us in such dire straits with the international community. And, again, I don't get all emotional about any comments that seem favorable to Donald Trump. I wish that he would be more respectful in his approach and all the other things, at least in his choice of language and those other things. But, one of the things that I often say that I think needs to be said today is the president of the United States is not the spiritual leader of the country. The church is the spiritual leader of the country. It's up to Christians to impact society in a positive way. And, when there's nobody that, is a true born-again Christian running for office, then we vote for the person with the platform who is closest to that which we believe is most like what God wants for this in any country. And again, so many people have just gotten sideways on this whole thing, and the church has been divided over it. And there's been responsibilities placed on people in political places of power that they have no right to. We are the salt of the earth. We are the preserving influence in this country. The church is. Nobody else. Not politicians, not the president. Nobody that lives on Pennsylvania Avenue has a responsibility for the spiritual health of this country. That falls on you and me, period. And we need to keep that in mind. Now, the Post-Millennial also says the Canadian military ordered hate crime investigation into vandalism, listen to this, of tampon dispensers in the men's bathrooms on military bases. The Chief Military Police Agency reviewed a number of complaints, however. The agency determined that the incidents did not fall within the organization's mandate to initiate an official investigation. Now, again, remember the Bible says the strong delusion is coming, and boy, is it here. It seems to have really taken a foothold up in Canada. Canadian military officials directed the Canadian Armed Forces with the Canadian leadership, that is, let me throw that caveat in there. Canadian military officials directed the Canadian Armed Forces Hate Crimes and Extremism units to investigate reports that soldiers had been vandalizing feminine hygiene product dispensers installed in male bathrooms. However, the investigation units declined the request, citing a lack of evidence. Documents obtained by True North show that military superiors were frantically trying to determine the reason for the disappearance of tampons and pads that were placed in male washrooms. Reports of the alleged vandalism were not confined to one military base, as per the documents, which stated that there were numerous complaints made at the Denison Armory in Toronto and the bases in Petawawa, Calgary, and Ottawa. The controversy erupted in December of 2023 following a directive from Prime Minister Trudeau's Liberal government, that's who I was talking about a moment ago, which mandated that military bases provide reproductive products in men's washrooms as part of a broader inclusivity initiative. The National Investigation Service and Specialized Hate Crimes, Extremism, Drugs, and Gang Enforcement Unit turned down the request to investigate. Initially, it was believed that the tampons vanishing from men's washrooms were disappearing as a result of high demand. Did you catch that? They thought that the products were being used, that there's so many men who have a menstrual cycle that the products were being used I'm sorry. It's just hard to believe sometimes the absolute insanity of people in places of power who are in control of entire nations, or at least to some degree. In an internal email dated January 26, 2024, the build and maintenance managers at CFB Calgary reported that the tampon supply at Waters was nearly depleted as a result of the high demand in the men's bathroom. Operations Officer Sean Delamere with the CAF Real Operations Unit in West Calgary noted that the tampons and pads were disappearing at such a rate that it sparked his attention. I have confirmed with the contractor At the tampon bin in the second floor men's restroom has been filled twice today, he wrote on January 29th, 2024, as reported by the paper. Now, obviously, this is beyond ridiculous. Men do not menstruate, and that's just that. It's impossible. They don't have the biological makeup, the physiological makeup for it. They don't have the right. How can you menstruate when you don't have a uterus? And it's just insane. Well, we know what their argument is that these women who think they're men are really men because they think so. And goodness sakes, absolutely insane. Now, our next story is kind of interesting. It comes from Watchers, which is a weather-related website that I follow. I know some of you heard me mention it before. But listen to this headline. It says, satellite images reveal the Sahara Desert is turning green. And satellite images of the Sahara show a visible increase in vegetation compared to just last year. And this has been caused by an increased precipitation over the region linked to the recent northward shift to the intertropical convergence zone. The increased rain over the Sahara Desert has led to the growth of visible vegetation in certain areas. And satellite images of Tanout, Niger, acquired on September 8, 2024, showed a visible increase in green patches compared to the images from September 14th of last year. The unusual rains are linked to the northward shift to the intertropical convergence zone, which is bringing in above average rainfall in some regions, expecting to see 500% of the typical monthly rainfall. And the ECMWF extended precipitation anomaly for early September and showed a large portion of the Sahara Desert under significant rainfall anomalies, forecasting 2024 to be the wettest year for the Sahara Desert since 1994. And the ITCZ shift, along with the record positive North Atlantic oscillation, has altered weather patterns across the Atlantic and Africa. This shift has led to increased rainfall in regions such as the Sahel and the Sahara Desert. Now, this is interesting because one of the things that we've been hearing about is the movement of true magnetic north. And the magnetic north or true north has been moving, and we've heard, that it was racing across Canada where it used to be and is now moving towards Siberia at just incredible rates, causing, GPS systems to require recalibration much more frequently than they used to. But one of the things I years and years ago, I'm talking 40 years ago, I was at an event and I was sitting next to the man who discovered the New Madrid Fault in the center of our country, a man named Dr. Ivan Browning. And we were talking, he was presenting the fact that the magnetic field is moving. It seemed to be accelerating even its movement even that many years ago. And one of the things he was proposing to us is that it wasn't a pastoral thing. It was an industry I was involved in at the time. And he was talking about the fact that, and by the way, I was in the forest industry, so he's talking about rainfall and that sort of thing that would impact the industry. And he was saying, as the magnetic field shifts, weather patterns are going to shift. And, it's interesting we hear so much about climate change today. When the climate does change, changes on its own, has nothing to do with human involvement or CO2 levels in the air created by animals or farming or factories or anything else. When the magnetic field moves, the weather patterns change. And we just see this from the story. And, it's been really interesting here in California. Anybody who lives here, I live in South Orange County. And, it's been kind of curious that, we had a weather streak in the summer type heat just a couple of weeks ago. And, we got the fires going and all the things that happen when there's intense heat and near or over 100-degree heat with all the brush and being dry and all that. And this is part of life here. It happens. But, overall, it's been a very, very mild summer. We had about 10 days of typical summer heat. The rest of the time, it was in the mid-70s, which is unusual for us. I mean, that's kind of our general average, I think, for most of the year, I think. Matter of fact, there's a city south of us in San Diego County called Vista, which I believe, therefore, it might still be true, had the most desirable climate on the planet. And by that, it's the most number of days at or near 72 degrees. So it's pretty stable around here. And, but this year it's been a very mild, and I've talked to you before about the breeze, normal coastal breeze that comes up usually around 3 o'clock every day. It's been blowing, and it's not just been a breeze, it's been windy first thing in the morning, and blowing all our stuff around in the backyard and all that. So it's been very unusual. And this has not got anything to do with man-made climate change. It has to do with the magnetic field of the earth moving and true magnetic north changing its position. And you would expect to see increased rainfall in places where it doesn't normally rain. We're going to have a couple days next week where it's hot again, but we're headed for fall, and we've already had temperatures in the mid 50s overnight, which again for us, that's kind of a wintertime thing. And once in a while we'll dip down into the 40s, even the low 40s over the winter months, but generally it's pretty stable. So it's been an interesting weather year here. But all of this reminds us that, one of the things that Jesus talked about in the Olivet Discourse, I call it the preamble to the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, 3-8, he talked about earthquakes along with the famines, pestilence, wars, ethnic tensions, all the other things that he said are going to happen, and then all of a sudden exponentially increase in frequency and intensity, like labor pains would on a pregnant woman. He calls them the beginning of sorrows, which is the commencement of birth pangs. You can translate it as that as well. But he talks about earthquakes, and the word used there is seismos, the Greek word. But seismos is not just a seismic event or a geological event. Seismos can also be translated as a gale or a tempest. So there's weather anomalies, and there's all kinds of weather anomalies, atmospheric weather anomalies going on all over the world right now, including something as unusual as a green Sahara desert. So, just everything is pointing to keep looking up. Our redemption is nigh. We're looking for that glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Israel has taken center stage in world events. The love of many has grown cold. The earth is filled with violence. The thoughts and intents of man's heart is only evil continually. Jesus said, when these things start to happen, I'm coming to get you. Look up, because the redemption of these bodies is at hand. So don't be in despair or overly discouraged. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's aggravating. And to see people, sit in places of power that are just, I don't know what word to use and still be kind, but just loonies. I don't know how else to say it. Just the stuff they think is just incredibly ridiculous and anti-science and all these other things. And that stuff is hard. And we are living in a time of strong delusion. There's no question about that. But keep in mind, all of that says Jesus is coming soon. Well, that's it for this week. And thank you again for joining us. And please, I'd encourage you to share this with your friends and family and help get the word out. We've just seen, I keep mentioning this because it's very frustrating. Like I said, past 2 weeks, I think I got a warning for something I said back in 2020 that who in the world was looking at a message that was on YouTube from 2020 and said I gave medical misinformation, quoting an article from Johns Hopkins University. And, the viewership for the lineup has dropped by 50% since then. So I know they're doing something to keep, people from seeing or stopping notifications or, unsubscribing people. They've been doing that a lot lately too. So I would appreciate it if you would share this and be praying for both my wife, Terry, and I. She's headed for Virginia on Sunday to do a retreat, speak at a retreat for all the women who work for Behold Israel. And I know she would covet and appreciate your prayers. And thank you for all who've been praying for her. I mentioned at church, and many of you have commented and asked how she's doing. She was very sick, sicker than I've ever seen her in our 49 years together. I've never seen her so sick. And she's just really yesterday, she said, I think I'm starting to feel normal. And so she needs all her strength for this weekend. But God is able. I think back over the years, there are times where I felt like I was just crawling up to the pulpit. And I get up there and God strengthens because he wants people to know truth and the truth that makes free. So with that said, again, thanks so much for watching. I love you guys and appreciate your prayers and support. And again, if you're in the Longview, Washington area this weekend, pop in at Calvary Chapel Longview for church on Sunday, 9/11. We'll be talking about the events that are happening right now in our world that tell us Jesus is coming soon. So God bless you. We'll see you here, there, or in the air.